Hello, and welcome again to Jazz Appreciation. We're going to begin our course by talking about improvisation, which is at the absolute center of the jazz art form. Improvisation is the skill that jazz musicians spend their lives working on to develop and perfect. And no other genre of music has the amount of improvisation that jazz possesses. We're going to define improvisation as the immediate creation of a melody. In a jazz performance, the improviser creates a melody on the spot, crafting a unique improvisation or a solo. If a musician is truly improvising, no two solos will be exactly the same, even if the same song is recorded a second or third time. This makes every jazz performance a singular event, and this uniqueness is one of the things about jazz that's attractive to both musicians and listeners. Improvising is often compared to storytelling. When a writer crafts a story, the writer uses words that have been used in other stories. In a similar manner, jazz has a set of musical words as well. And that analogy is the basis for the concept that jazz is a language. The improviser uses vocabulary he or she has acquired and developed to tell their story in the moment. The improviser is prepared for this moment by previously learning a good deal of jazz vocabulary. While the creation of an individual solo is immediate, the melodies an improviser plays during that solo have often been previously learned, or similar melodies have been used in the past by the improviser. So this vocabulary is acquired in a variety of ways. In older jazz styles, and when jazz was getting going, the vocabulary was mostly acquired by listening to records and imitating, pretty much an oral method of communication. As jazz got more involved in the educational movement, things became more written out. So now it's more possible to buy a book and get the vocabulary through the written word. And now a lot of modern players use a combination of those things. Over the history of jazz, the greatest improvisers developed vocabulary that has highly influenced other improvisers of that time and those who came later. Most of them are called our old-time jazz greats. So I'd like to play for you some examples of particular improvisers' vocabulary. So in the same situation, you'll hear four very different approaches to jazz vocabulary. So first is the alto saxophonist Charlie Parker. He used a lot of scales and arpeggios in the bebop style, and he would play something like this. So very busy. Louis Armstrong, the early jazz trumpet player, had a little different approach, something like this. Then Miles Davis, another great trumpet player who came along later, played something like this. And finally, the eccentric pianist Thelonious Monk, the unusual pianist, would play something like this. So those players have all affected improvisers' languages in very different ways. So the greatest improvisers have developed their own vocabulary and sound so distinctly that they are as recognizable to an experienced listener as hearing a friend's voice over the phone. And I'm sure a lot of the great improvisers will become that recognizable to you over time through this course. Each improviser's language varies based on their influences, creativity, and stylistic choices. Many voices, as I said, are instantly recognizable. Now let's return to the idea of storytelling and improvisation. Improvisers use vocabulary to tell a story when they create a solo, increasing interest as the solo progresses through the use of musical devices or tools. The goal is generally to build the improvisation to a climax by using musical tools such as speed, range, and volume. Visually, that looks like this. You'll see on the horizontal axis we have the time, and on the vertical axis we have the excitement level. So I'm going to play a demonstration of a short solo that builds in intensity. I'll tell you when I pass each of the marks on the horizontal axis of the graph. And you'll hear an increase in intensity as I move through this short solo. In a full-length performance, I would do this more gradually than what you're about to hear. All right, here we go, starting at the beginning of the graph. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here comes the first mark, right here, now. Next mark. Heading for the end. And notice near the end I brought it down just a little bit, which you typically hear in improvisation. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the solo curve in jazz works. All right, we're going to talk now about transitioning from a pre-composed melody to an improvisation. So I'm going to play you 8 bars of a melody from the song Bye Bye Blackbird, kind of a famous jazz standard. And then in the second version, you'll hear a very similar melody, but with some embellishments, just slight variations. You still should be able to follow the melody fairly clearly. And then the third version, I'm going to go further away from the melody. Still, you might be able to hear pieces of it, but it'll start to become less and less recognizable. And finally, in the fourth version, I'll be doing what you might call a full-blown improvisation, where you may not be able to recognize the melody at all. All right, here we go. Here's the second version. Third version. And the final version. So this might have been a way that improvisation got started in jazz, starting with first the pre-composed melody and then gradually varying it to the point that it became an art to depart from the melody quite a bit. The quest for mastery of the art of improvisation is a lifelong, infinite pursuit that many musicians have dedicated their lives to. And as we go through the course, we'll discuss the musical tools that the great improvisers use to tell their stories. While other musical genres, such as rock, blues, and country music, utilize improvisation to some degree, jazz is the only genre where improvisation is the major focus of the performance. The large majority of listeners and critics believe a piece of music must have improvisation in order to be considered jazz. So to summarize our video, improvisation, the immediate creation of a melody, is central to the art of jazz. Improvising is often compared to storytelling. The greatest improvisers have highly influenced the vocabulary of those jazz musicians who came later. Improvisers use vocabulary to tell a story when they create a solo, increasing interest as the solo progresses through a variety of musical devices. You can already hear and recognize many of these musical tools and many of the great jazz improvisers. We'll talk about that in our next video when we discuss what you already hear when you listen to jazz. See you then.